If you, the listener, believe that everything you are, your knowledge, your character, your beliefs, was written onto your mind solely through experience, well, you're actually tapping into one of the most foundational ideas of the European Enlightenment.
Mm-hmm.
But here's a twist, maybe the surprise. The engine that really drove that idea, perfected it, wasn't forged in, say, ancient Athens or Renaissance Italy.
No, not at all.
It came out of the Islamic Golden Age. So today, we're going on a journey. We're tracing the path of the Tabula Rasa, the blank slate idea.
That's right.
And we'll discover how two pretty radical philosophical novels from the 12th and 13th centuries basically exported revolutionary concepts straight into Europe and, well, arguably changed the whole course of Western thought.
Exactly. Our mission today, you could say, is a bit like intellectual genealogy. We are diving deep into this concept, the mind as a blank slate, and we're going to follow its trail. From Aristotle, yeah, but crucially through the Islamic world, particularly Al-Andalus, and then track its, frankly, huge impact on thinkers like John Locke, and even the birth of whole literary genres.
Okay.
And we'll use two really key philosophical works to guide us, one very rationalist, the other more theological. There are maps for this exploration.
Excellent. So let's start right at the beginning. Define the cornerstone. Tabula Rasa, it's Latin, we know that, but what does it actually mean philosophically?
So tabula rasa literally translates to erased slate or maybe blank tablet. In epistemology, that's the study of knowledge. It's the theory that says individuals are born without any built-in mental content. No innate ideas, no pre-wired skills.
So we aren't born knowing geometry or theology or even like basic right and wrong?
Nope. According to this theory, nothing's preloaded.
Okay, so if there are no innate ideas, then everything we know, everything we are, it has to be acquired somehow. It's really the ultimate argument for nurture, isn't it?
Yeah.
Over nature.
Absolutely. It puts all the weight on experience. All knowledge comes from our senses. What we see, hear, touch from perception, and of course from education. The term itself, tabula rasa, actually comes from something physical.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, the Romans used these wax tablets, a tabula, for writing notes.
Right, like a reusable notepad.
Exactly. And you could just heat the wax slightly, smooth it over, and wipe it clean. An erased tablet, or a rasa tablet, ready for new input.
That's a great visual. Now, you mentioned the idea itself is older than the Roman term. Aristotle, back in ancient Greece, he talked about the mind being like an unscribed tablet in dianima.
He did, yes. The seed is definitely there with Aristotle.
So why didn't that idea just, take off in the West right away?
Yeah.
Why the long gap?
Well, Aristotle mentioned it, but for centuries after him, especially in early medieval Europe, the philosophical climate was dominated more by Platonic ideas or variations of them.
Plato and his forms. Innate concepts.
Exactly. The idea that we're born with certain knowledge may be forgotten or veiled, like the pure forms of mathematics or justice or beauty. So Aristotle's unscribed tablet analogy was kind of there, but it was overshadowed. It didn't really become a central driving theory until
the Islamic thinkers picked it up.
Precisely. They revived it, refined it, and really made it a cornerstone of their epistemology.
Which brings us neatly to our first major figure, Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna, lived around 980 to 1037, a true polymath.
Oh, absolutely. Avicenna is one of the towering figures of, world history. Philosopher, scientist, physician, his medical encyclopedia, the canon of medicine.
Legendary. Used in Europe for centuries, wasn't it?
For 600 years, it was the standard medical text in European universities. But for our purposes today, the key thing is his role in the Islamic peripatetic school of philosophy.
Peripatetic. That's the Aristotelian influence school, right?
Right.
Trying to synthesize Greek philosophy with Islamic thought.
That's the one. And within this framework, Avicenna formally took Aristotle's basic idea of the blank slate and developed it into a much more structured, detailed theory of knowledge. He really integrated it.
Okay, so how did he expand on it? What was Avicenna's take?
He was incredibly systematic. Avicenna argued that the human intellect at birth isn't just empty, it's in a state of pure potentiality. It's like a capacity waiting to be filled. It has the potential to know everything, but it doesn't actually know anything yet.
Okay, pure potential.
Yeah.
So how does this potential become actual knowledge? What's the process? How do we fill the slate?
It's a rigorous step-by-step process. He outlined 4 stages of the intellect, moving from that pure potential state towards full understanding. It all starts naturally with the senses.
Sensory perception,
Yeah.
seeing, touching, hearing,
Yeah,
gathering the raw data from the world.
exactly. That's the first stage. And then comes the second stage. You take that raw sensory data and you start applying reason to it. deduction, using syllogistic logic, observing patterns.
So you take the messy, particular experiences, seeing this fire, and use logic to form general, universal concepts like fire is hot or combustion requires fuel, transforming specifics into propositional statements.
Yes, precisely. It's about moving from the particular to the universal through reasoned observation and analysis. This entire process relies solely on the individual's own empirical work and their rational capacity.
And what's the final step? Is there an end goal to this process?
There is. The final and perhaps most crucial stage involves perfecting this process, moving from potentiality to the complete actualization of knowledge. And Avicenna termed this achieving conjunction with the active intellect.
The active intellect, al-aql al-fa'il. That sounds significant and maybe a bit mysterious. What exactly is it?
It is significant and, a little esoteric from our modern viewpoint. In Avicenna's cosmology, which blended Aristotelian ideas with Neoplatonism and Islamic thought, the active intellect was considered the last of 10 cosmic intelligences. Think of it as a kind of immaterial, universal source of intellectual light or emanation.
So it's not part of the individual human mind. It's external.
Correct. It's external and transcendent. It's the agent that actually actualizes the potential knowledge within the prepared human mind. It doesn't teach you in the normal sense, but it illuminates the universal truths once your own intellect has done the hard work of preparation through senses and reason.
So the journey is empirical, gather data, use reason, but the final destination, grasping the pure universal concepts, requires this connection, this illumination from the active intellect.
That's the synthesis Avicenna achieved. You absolutely have to do the empirical and logical groundwork. But when your intellect reaches its highest state of readiness, the active intellect provides the spark, allowing the grasp of abstract universal truths. It gave the rationalist philosophers a pathway to knowledge that was both rigorously empirical and ultimately transcendent. It really elevated the whole idea of the blank slate.
Okay, that sets the stage perfectly. Avicenna lays down this powerful theoretical framework. Now, let's jump forward about a century and see how his successor, Ibn Tufayl, turns this very theory into a kind of practical demonstration, a thought experiment in story form.
Right. We move to the 12th century to Al-Andalus, Islamic Spain, and meet Ibn Tufayl, known in the West sometimes as Abubacer. Like Avicenna, he was a physician, a philosopher, advisor to the Almohad court, and he inherits this peripatetic Avicennan tradition.
And he writes this incredible novel, Hayy ibn Yadqhan, which means alive, son of awake.
Exactly. And the Latin title it eventually got in Europe really tells you the core idea. Philosophus Autodidactus.
The self-taught philosopher. It's all right there.
It is. The novel is basically one extended, incredibly detailed thought experiment. It imagines a child, Hayy, growing up utterly alone on a deserted island in the Indian Ocean. Some versions say he was spontaneously generated, others that he washed ashore as a baby. The point is, zero human contact, zero cultural transmission.
He starts as a literal, living tabula rasa, a complete blank slate in human form.
The ultimate test case. And Tufayl meticulously describes how Hayy, just through his own senses and reason, figures out the entire world.
What's really striking is how Tufayl uses scientific observation as the engine for Hayy's philosophical development. Can you give us an example of that empirical journey?
Yeah, the most famous one involves the death of a gazelle that had nursed him as an infant. He essentially regarded her as his mother. When she dies, Hayy is distraught, but also deeply curious. He wants to know why she died, what went wrong.
So he doesn't just grieve, he investigates.
He performs an autopsy, a detailed dissection looking for the source of the malfunction. Remember, this is the 12th century. Systematic human dissection was certainly not common practice, especially not driven by this kind of philosophical inquiry.
That's radical. What does he find?
He meticulously examines all her organs. He finds them physically intact, but something essential is missing: the warmth, the movement, the life. Through this physical investigation, he deduces the existence of something non-physical, a vital spirit or soul, the animating principle that had departed.
Wow. So he uses empirical physical observation dissection to infer something metaphysical, the existence of a soul. That's Avicenna's method in action.
Absolutely. Observation leads to reasoned deduction about unseen realities, and he applies the same method to everything.
To the whole universe.
Yes. He observes the patterns of nature, the stars, the sun, the moon, the elements. Through years of careful observation and logical reasoning, he starts asking bigger questions. Is the universe eternal? Or was it created?
And what does he conclude, alone on his island?
He deduces through reason alone that the universe cannot be eternal. It must have a creator. This was a huge point for the Islamic peripatetics using Aristotelian logic to argue against Aristotle's own conclusion about the eternity of the world, bringing it in line with the concept of divine creation.
Okay, so just using his senses and his brain, Hayy arrives at fundamental truths. The existence of a soul, the necessity of a creator, the ordered nature of the cosmos. These are profound theological conclusions. What does that imply about traditional religious revelation? About scripture and prophets?
That's the core argument of the novel. It implies that philosophical truth, the truth you can reach through rigorous independent reason and eventually mystical contemplation, is identical to the truth revealed through prophecy and scripture.
So reason and revelation lead to the same peak.
Exactly. The novel is the ultimate advertisement for the peripatetic rationalist worldview. The philosopher, using the God-given tools of sense and reason, can independently discover all essential truths.
But Tufayl doesn't stop there, does he? The story takes a turn when Hayy finally encounters another human. It explores the social implications of this idea.
Right. The second half introduces Absal, a spiritual seeker from a nearby island ruled by a king named Salaman. Absal represents a more conventional religious path, seeking deeper meaning beyond literalism. Salaman represents the law-bound societal norm.
And how does Hayy fit into their society?
He doesn't, really. Hayy tries to explain his profound, abstract, philosophical understanding of God and reality to Salaman's people, but they just can't grasp it. They're focused on the literal interpretations of their religion, the rituals, the social rules, material comforts. Hayy's unadorned, rational truth is inaccessible, even confusing or dangerous to them.
So Tufayl seems to be suggesting a kind of intellectual hierarchy. There's the elite philosopher, like Hayy, who gets the pure truth through reason, and then there are the masses,
who need religion in its symbolic, ritualistic, law-based form to maintain social order and provide a framework they can understand. The novel argues that conventional religion, with its stories and rules, is necessary for the multitude who can't undertake Hayy's arduous intellectual journey.
It suggests prophecy and scripture are accommodations for those unable to achieve direct rational or mystical insight. The philosopher validates revelation through reason, but perhaps stands apart from its literal practice.
It's a powerful, potentially controversial idea. And this whole package, the radical individualism, the power of empiricism, reason discovering all truth, this intellectual hierarchy, it was utterly revolutionary.
Okay, now let's make the pivot. This 12th century Arabic philosophical novel, packed with these potentially explosive ideas.
Yeah.
How does it end up becoming a foundational text for the European Enlightenment centuries later? This feels like the really crucial part of the story.
It's an absolutely fascinating story of transmission. The novel, Hayy bin Yadqhan, circulated in the Arabic and Hebrew-speaking worlds for centuries. But the key moment for Europe comes much later, in the 17th century.
Okay.
In 1671, a renowned Oxford Orientalist named Edward Pocock the Younger published the first Latin translation, and he gave it that very revealing title, Philosophus Autodidactus.
Pocock. And wasn't he connected to a certain major Enlightenment figure?
He absolutely was. Pocock was the tutor, colleague, and friend of none other than John Locke.
John Locke, the father of classical liberalism, the champion of empiricism.
The very same. Locke was at Christ Church, Oxford, closely associated with Pocock when this translation appeared. And just under 2 decades later, in 1690, Locke publishes his own monumental work, an essay concerning human understanding.
The essay where he famously attacks the whole idea of innate concepts and argues powerfully that the mind at birth is a
tabula rasa, a blank slate.
Right.
Locke's entire epistemological project arguing that all knowledge comes purely from experience, which he divided into sensation, external observation, and reflection, internal processing of those observations. It directly mirrors the journey of Hayy ibn Yadqhan.
It really does. Hay's entire development is sensation, observing the island, the gazelle, the stars, followed by reflection, applying reason and deduction to that sensory input.
It's almost uncanny. Hay's story is the practical, narrative demonstration of Locke's theory. The consensus among scholars is overwhelming. Locke was deeply influenced by Philosophus Autodidactus. It provided him with the perfect thought experiment, already fully realized, to show that a human, stripped of all societal input, could indeed construct a complex understanding of the world and even God, just through senses and reason.
So Tufayl's novel gave Locke's radical empiricism a kind of narrative backbone, a proof of concept.
Exactly. It validated the blank slate idea in a very compelling way. And the influence didn't stop with Locke. This book just took off across Europe.
It became a bestseller.
An intellectual sensation. After Pocock's Latin version, it was translated into English, then German, French, Dutch, multiple times throughout the late 17th and 18th centuries. It wasn't just philosophers reading it. Scientists, writers, theologians. Everyone was talking about the self-taught philosopher. George Sarton, who basically founded the history of science as its own independent field of study, he considered Philosophus Autodidactus to be, and I quote, one of the most original books of the Middle Ages.
Wow. High praise, especially considering how much European thought had supposedly moved on by the time he was writing. Who else was reading it? Who did it impact?
Figures like Robert Boyle, the pioneering chemist.
Father of modern chemistry, yeah.
He was fascinated by it. Baruch Spinoza, the radical rationalist philosopher, engaged with its ideas. Gottfried Leibniz, who famously debated Locke on innate ideas versus the blank slate, definitely knew the work. Even later figures like Immanuel Kant, Voltaire, the ripples spread far and wide.
And it affected more than just pure philosophy, right? You mentioned education, literature.
Oh, definitely. Think about Jean-Jacques Rousseau, his massively influential book Emile, or On Education from 1762.
Right, about raising a child naturally, away from society's corruption.
Exactly. Emile learns directly from nature and experience, guided by his tutor but shielded from dogma. It's a clear echo of Hayy's solitary experiential education. The underlying principle is the same. Let the natural man develop through reason and observation. Some even see echoes in Kipling's The Jungle Book, this idea of the child raised outside human norms.
And the most direct literary impact. You mentioned a whole genre.
Yes, the deserted island story. Hayy ibn Yadqhan is widely acknowledged as the progenitor, the foundational text, for the entire genre of what we sometimes call Robinsonades.
After Robinson Crusoe.
Precisely. Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe, published in 1719, is the most famous example, and the connection is undeniable. It's often called the first true novel in English, had a massive impact on the Enlightenment, and of course it's set on a deserted island, drawing directly from this Hayy ibn Yadqhan tradition.
So the philosophical novel basically served as the template for the first great modern individualist adventure story.
Crusoe, stranded alone, uses his ingenuity, his reason, his Protestant work ethic to survive and master his environment. But the core premise, the isolated individual, building a world through their own rationality, proving the power of the self-sufficient human, that template was set by Ibn Tufayl 5 centuries earlier. In 1761, an anonymous Crusoe story was printed in London, entitled The Life and Surprising Adventures of Don Antonio de Trezano, much of which was conveyed or paraphrased from Ockley's translation of Hayy ibn Yadqhan.
Wow. Conveyed or paraphrased? That's not subtle.
Not subtle at all. It was often direct borrowing, repackaging the narrative framework for a new audience.
So, summing up this European impact, Tufayl's novel acted as a kind of Trojan horse, didn't it? Carrying these Islamic peripatetic ideas, radical individualism, the sovereignty of reason, the power of empiricism over tradition, right into the heart of the developing European Enlightenment.
It absolutely did. It provided a powerful narrative vehicle for ideas that resonated deeply with the Enlightenment project. It validated the capacity of the individual rational mind.
Its reach crossed the Atlantic to North America, and it became a tool in a very different cultural context there.
Yes, this is another really striking part from the source material. It's very explicit. The English translation of Hayy ibn Yadqhan, specifically Simon Ockley's version, was known to the Royal Society, naturally, but also to the New England Company in North America by 1721.
Okay, so it's physically present in the colonies early on.
Yes. And the most remarkable instance involves the incredibly prominent Puritan theologian, Cotton Mather.
Cotton Mather. The Salem witch trials figure.
The very same. The sources state that Mather's own work, The Christian Philosopher, actually cited Hayy ibn Yadqhan as a direct influence.
That is genuinely staggering.
Mm-hmm.
A leading figure of the Puritan establishment, often so wary of external, especially non-Christian influence, using a medieval Islamic philosophical text from Spain.
The irony is just intense, isn't it? Mathers, even while condemning the Mahometans as infidels in his writings, he apparently viewed the protagonist Hayy as a kind of model, a model for his ideal Christian philosopher and monotheistic scientist.
How did he square that circle?
He admired Hay's apparent ability to use pure reason, starting from nothing, to arrive at monotheistic truth. He saw Hayy as this rationalist hero, proving that belief in one God was accessible through logic alone. But the influence didn't stop there. It actually got applied in a very politically and culturally charged way.
How so? What did Mather do with it?
Well, Mather essentially applied the character of Hayy to the local context in New England. The source says he viewed Hayy as a kind of noble savage. You know, this idea of a pure human existing in a state of nature, uncorrupted by civilization.
Okay.
And he applied this concept directly in his attempts to understand the Native American populations, the Indians, as the source quotes him, specifically in order to convert them to Puritan Christianity.
So he used Hayy as a model for understanding Native Americans.
Yeah. Essentially, yes. He used the blank slate thought experiment, filtered through Hay's journey, to create a kind of missionary template. The logic was something like, if this fictional man, born without any teaching, can reason his way to monotheism, then surely the quote-unquote noble savage here in America can be molded through education and conversion into the ideal Christian figure.
That just dramatically illustrates how these philosophical ideas get picked up, twisted, and repurposed based on completely different local needs and agendas.
Absolutely. And just to round off the European influence, we also see the novel's themes of individual discovery, of finding truth for oneself, resonating very strongly with religious dissenters back in Europe.
Makes sense. The idea of finding truth without needing the established church.
Precisely. The novel's message of potentially achieving mystical and rational discovery, independent of any established hierarchy, strongly appealed to dissenting groups like the Quakers. Figures such as George Keith and Robert Barclay seem to have embraced its message of individual truth discovery, bypassing the need for church mediation.
So it provided this powerful narrative justification for religious and intellectual individualism.
It really did, which just underscores why this single text, Hayy ibn Yadqhan, was truly revolutionary. It wasn't just a story, it was challenging old institutions and ways of thinking across multiple continents and centuries.
And there was one more specific philosophical debate it got tangled up in, something called Molyneux's problem.
Ah, yes, Molyneux's question. William Molyneux posed this thought experiment to Locke, actually. Imagine a man born blind who has learned to distinguish a cube from a sphere purely by touch. Okay, now imagine this man suddenly gains sight. Could he, just by looking, without touching them, tell which one is the cube and which is the sphere?
That's tricky. It gets right to the heart of how different senses work together, or if our understanding of shapes is innate or learned.
Exactly. Rationalists might argue the concept of cube is innate, so yes, he'd know. But empiricists like Locke argued no, he'd have to learn to correlate the new visual sensations with his existing tactile understanding. And guess what? Critics and commentators discussing Molyneux's problem explicitly referenced Hayy ibn Yadqhan.
How so?
Because Tufayl's novel details how Hayy learns to interpret sensory data, how he has to figure out perspective, how he learns to associate sights with sounds or textures. Hay's journey supported the empiricist answer. Knowledge derived from one sense doesn't automatically transfer to another. It has to be learned through experience.
So an ancient Arabic novel was being used as evidence in cutting-edge 17th and 18th century European debates about perception theory. The reach is just astonishing.
It truly is. The long shadow of Philosophus Autodidactus is undeniable.
Okay, so while this rationalist masterpiece is busy sparking revolutions in European thought, what was the reaction back in the Islamic world? Did everyone just accept Hay's conclusions, this idea that reason alone gets you to the truth?
Oh, absolutely not. It was hugely influential, yes, but also deeply challenging, especially to the more orthodox theological schools. The Peripatetic school, this very rationalist, Greek-inspired approach, had its powerful critics.
And the main critics were the Ash'arites.
Primarily, yes. The Asharite school of theology became arguably the dominant Sunni theological position, and their whole project was, in many ways, about safeguarding the primacy and sheer omnipotence of God and the absolute necessity of divine revelation through prophets.
So Hay's story, where he figures everything out himself without needing a prophet or a scripture, that would have been a problem for them.
A big problem. If reason alone is sufficient, as Tufayl seemed to suggest, then what's the unique role of prophecy? Why did God need to send messengers and books? It potentially sidelined revelation, which was the cornerstone of the Asharite view. They saw it as a theological threat.
Which leads us perfectly to our second philosophical novel, and its author, Ibn al-Nafis. He lived about a century after Tufayl, right? 13th century.
That's right, 1213 to 1288. And Ibn al-Nafis is another figure of immense stature, but in a slightly different way than Tufayl or Avicenna. He was, first and foremost, a scientist, a physician.
And not just any physician. He's credited with a major discovery, isn't he?
A monumental one. Ibn al-Nafis was the first person known to correctly describe the pulmonary circulation of the blood, how blood flows from the right side of the heart to the lungs to get oxygenated, and then back to the left side of the heart to be pumped to the body.
Centuries before European scientists like Michael Servetus or William Harvey are credited with it in the West.
Centuries. We're talking the 1200s versus the 1500s and 1600s. So this guy had a deep, empirical, anatomical understanding of the human body, and the scientific rigor deeply informs his philosophical work.
So this brilliant scientist decides to write a novel, specifically to counter Ibn Tufayl's novel.
Exactly. He writes al-Risala al-Kamilya fil Siyara al-Nabawiyya, which translates roughly as the Treatise of Camille on the Prophet's biography, but it became known in Latin, mirroring Tufayl's title, as Theologus Autodidactus.
The self-taught theologian. Okay, the counter-argument is right there in the title again.
Right. He uses the exact same literary device. A protagonist, Camille, raised alone on a deserted island, learning everything through observation and reason. The setup is identical. But the conclusions Camille reaches are radically different, designed specifically to uphold the Asharite theological viewpoint.
How does he flip the script? If Camille also uses reason and observation, how does he end up needing theology and revelation where Hayy didn't?
Well, Camille also starts with empiricism, but Ibn al-Nafis, drawing on the best scientific knowledge of his time, his own advanced knowledge, argues that rigorous scientific observation doesn't just lead you to a creator, it leads you to understand the necessity of ongoing divine action and, crucially, the absolute necessity of prophetic guidance and revealed law.
So he uses science to reinforce theology, not bypass it. This sounds like a really interesting development in Islamic thought, moving from that earlier heavily Greek-influenced rationalism towards a more integrated orthodox framework that still values empiricism but anchors it firmly in revelation.
That's a perfect way to put it. It represents a maturation, a synthesis. The Asharites weren't anti-reason, but they wanted reason to serve revelation. And Ibn al-Nafis's novel is the showcase for that.
You also mentioned something intriguing earlier, that while Tufayl's novel preceded modern fiction, Ibn al-Nafis's novel, because of its scientific content, might be considered the first true science fiction novel.
I think there's a strong case to be made, yes. Tufayl's work is philosophical allegory. Al-Nafis's work incorporates detailed and, for its time, remarkably accurate scientific descriptions and speculative scientific ideas as part of the plot and argument. It's using science to explore philosophical and theological questions in a way that feels very precursor to modern sci-fi.
Okay, let's get into that science. How does it start? What about Camille's origin? Is it as fantastical as Hay's?
It's still spontaneous generation, but al-Nafis describes it with almost clinical detail, drawing on his medical background. Camille forms in a cave after a flood, not magically, but through a process al-Nafis describes involving the mixing of elements, fermentation, reaching an equilibrium. He even talks about the formation of specific organs from this elemental mixture, the refining of the airy spirit into life.
Wow. That's an attempt to provide a naturalistic mechanism for abiogenesis based on 13th century science. Not just poof, he appeared.
Exactly. It's trying to ground even this miraculous origin in observable, understandable processes, as understood then, and the scientific realism continues.
How so? Does Camille also perform dissections like Hayy?
Yes, but al-Nafis's descriptions of anatomy and physiology are far more detailed and dynamic, reflecting his own expertise. The novel contains passages describing biological metabolism, the constant process of the body breaking down materials, catabolism, and building new ones. The anabolism.
Wait a minute. He's describing metabolic processes of the body in constant flux, breaking down and rebuilding in a novel in the 1200s. Those concepts weren't really defined like that in Europe until, the 16th, 17th centuries, even later.
It's quite remarkable. He presented a view of the body not as a static machine, but as a constantly regenerating system. This was cutting-edge physiology for its time, embedded directly into the narrative.
And how does this advanced science serve the Asharite theological mission? How does it counter the peripatetic view Tufayl represented?
Well, Camille, like Hayy, uses observation, induction, causality to reason his way towards the creator. But al-Nafis uses the sheer complexity, the dynamism, the constant need for maintenance he observes in the world, like metabolism, to argue against the peripatetic idea of an eternal, self-sufficient universe.
So the complexity points towards a necessary ongoing creator and sustainer, not just a first cause way back when.
Exactly. For al-Nafis and the Asharites, observation of nature didn't just prove a creator existed, it proved the impossibility of the universe existing without continuous divine will and action. This directly countered the peripatetic tendency towards deism or an eternal universe.
Okay, so Tufayl used reason to show revelation wasn't strictly necessary for truth. Al-Nafis used rigorous science and reason to show why divine action and revealed guidance were absolutely essential.
Precisely. Camille's journey leads him to understand not just God, but the need for divine law and prophets to guide humanity properly, something Hayy never concluded.
Now, the most sci-fi sounding element you mentioned, al-Nafis uses science to rationalize Islamic eschatology, the end times, resurrection. How on earth does he do that?
This is perhaps the most startling part of Theologus Autodidactus. He attempts to provide a naturalistic scientific explanation for how the events described in Islamic scripture concerning the end of the world might actually occur.
He's trying to scientifically model the apocalypse in the 13th century.
It's truly breathtaking. He theorizes that the trigger wouldn't be purely supernatural, but a predictable, albeit catastrophic, natural event. Specifically, he posits a significant deviation in the movement of the sun and planets. An astronomical shift.
Okay, an astronomical event. What are the consequences he predicts from this shift?
He argues this celestial deviation would cause a massive global change in weather patterns. Intense, unbearable heat near the equator, extreme cold and ice elsewhere. A fundamental disruption of the Earth's climate system.
A global climate catastrophe triggered by astronomical changes.
But he doesn't stop there. He then predicts the societal consequences of this climate collapse. He writes that the environmental stress would fundamentally alter human behavior for the worse.
Oh, so.
He predicts it would lead to widespread social breakdown. Many wars, troubles, and bloodshed. The bad people will be to the fore and the good people in the background. The collapse of the climate leads directly to the collapse of civilization and moral order.
I have to say, hearing a 13th century theologian using the scientific understanding of his time astronomy, climate, to model a future where environmental catastrophe leads to societal collapse, warfare, and moral decay, it sounds disturbingly relevant, almost eerily prescient of our own contemporary anxieties about climate change and its impacts.
Doesn't it? It's an absolutely stunning example of attempting to synthesize religious eschatology with the best available scientific reasoning. He's trying to show that even the most seemingly supernatural prophetic events could have underlying natural mechanisms, all within God's plan. It demonstrated that revelation and reason, including cutting-edge science, could perfectly align within the orthodox Asherite framework.
It's a powerful synthesis. It shows that the move towards Asherite orthodoxy wasn't necessarily a move away from science, but an attempt to integrate science into a different theological framework.
Precisely. Science becomes a tool to understand and affirm revealed truth, rather than a potential rival to it.
What an incredible intellectual journey we've traced. Let's try to bring it all together. We started with Avicenna, who took the ancient seed of the Tabula Rasa idea and cultivated it into a formal philosophical system within the Islamic peripatetic tradition.
Right. Then Ibn Tufayl, a century later, dramatized that concept in Hayy ibn Yadqhan, the story of the self-taught philosopher, arguing that pure reason could reach the same truths as revelation.
And that novel, Philosophus Autodidactus, then journeyed into Europe, where through figures like Locke, it became a crucial catalyst for the Enlightenment, championing empiricism, individualism, and even shaping literary genres like the deserted island tale.
But back in the Islamic world, Tufayl's rationalist thesis sparked a powerful counter-reaction from the orthodox Asherite school.
Leading to Ibn al-Nafis, the brilliant scientist who wrote Theologus Autodidactus. He used the same deserted island setup, but deployed advanced 13th century science to argue for the necessity of revelation and divine law, showing how reason and science could serve theology.
Exactly. These two novels, born from the same milieu but representing different stages and tensions within Islamic thought, tell a fascinating story. One exported revolutionary rationalist ideas that helped ignite the European Enlightenment. The other demonstrated the maturation of Islamic philosophy into an orthodox framework that was still deeply engaged with empirical science, even using it to explore eschatology.
The so what here feels massive. The very foundations of modern Western thought, the idea that you learn through experience, that the individual mind is powerful, the tabula rasa itself, are deeply indebted to this Islamic intellectual tradition transmitted through these specific texts.
The connection is undeniable. Locke didn't invent the blank slate. He inherited, adapted, and popularized a concept meticulously developed and explored centuries earlier, largely thanks to Tufayl's compelling narrative experiment.
And looking at the internal Islamic debate, the Asherite response, often painted as a turn away from the golden age of rationalism. Well, it produced Ibn al-Nafis's work.
which, as we discussed, reads like proto-science fiction. Using rigorous scientific reasoning, as understood then, to model biological processes like metabolism, and even to forecast civilizational collapse triggered by global ecological disaster. It was a deeply science-infused theology.
Which brings us to a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to perhaps mull over. If early Islamic Orthodox theology, the very schools sometimes blamed for a supposed decline in free scientific inquiry, was actually capable of producing such strikingly prescient science-informed warnings about global catastrophe and societal breakdown rooted in environmental shifts.
Warnings that sound unnervingly familiar today.
And what kinds of conversations, what kinds of modern, scientifically literate theological or philosophical frameworks might we be missing today? What happens to our ability to grapple with existential threats like climate change or social fragmentation when our theological and philosophical traditions perhaps don't engage as deeply or creatively with contemporary scientific understanding as Ibn al-Nafis did with his? What vital insights are lost when theology and science talk past each other?